The roguelike genre has evolved a lot over the past 10 years, and with new developers having their own interpretations and design philosophies, it's led to a very wide spectrum of games. It also means that kind of the rules and basic strategies and tips for designing them have also changed. For today's critical thought, we're going to talk about how, in a strange turn, you can treat good roguelike design much like how you can treat a good Steam store page when it comes to getting people to find your game. I'm not going to sit here and rehash all the design videos we've done on roguelike design here on the channel, because I'm sure all of you have bought all my books and have watched those videos several hundred times by now. But at the heart of any good roguelike design and randomization procedural generation, it is the idea of variance. That is, the number of viable ways of playing through a roguelike. And this is what will oftentimes separate bad, good, and amazing roguelikes from one another. The more ways you have for the player to win, the deeper your mechanics and systems are. It doesn't matter if you have 80,000 items and 70,000 room types, if the player can only win by using 3 specific items. And there's a general fear, I think, from a lot of roguelike designers or first-timers when it comes to implementing random and proc gen. That on one end of the spectrum, if the game is too easy, then the player gets bored, they feel like the game is busted, it doesn't work, they refund it, and they get angry. On the other hand, if it's too hard, then they feel the game is impossible and it's not balanced right, they get frustrated, they refund the game, and they go away. And it's very easy to fall into either mindset when it comes to proc gen, because again, procedural generation is inherently about removing or taking away control of the game's pacing and design from the developer. But it works when it comes to games that provide the player with multiple means of winning. That again, you don't want it to be about having to collect a specific item or following a specific build. You want multiple builds and multiple items. And when we look at some of the better examples of this design, again, your Balatro, Monster Train, Binding of Isaac, Warriors of the Nile, and so on, there's a very loose sense of balance. And we're going to use air quotes for balance in this video. Because typically, when we talk about game balance, it's about making sure that every option is really good, every option is viable, and that you're trying to create a measured experience. But you see, the problem with roguelikes is that you can't have a fully measured experience. If you build a roguelike that is that kind of linear, then you've betrayed the nature of roguelike design. What you want are spikes. And one of the things that we've seen from a lot of the better roguelikes is this idea of like the spikiness of their options and abilities. This goes as far back as stuff like the Binding of Isaac and Enter the Gungeon, where in Isaac, again, in my interview with Edmund McMillan, he said he did not care about balancing those items. If he thought of something cool and weird and interesting, he was going to put in the game. So if you wanted to get a penta shot into a quad shot into a rapid fire shot and just go to town, you could do that any which way you wanted. If you didn't want that, or if you have a run where you don't get it, well, that's okay, because it would always be the next run. And again, a lot of developers are very nervous about this kind of spikiness. They will oftentimes have hard limits on what the player can and can't get in a play. Maybe it's a numerical limit. You can only have 10 artifacts, 5 powers, 6 upgrades. Or it could be that powers have kind of an overriding nature. So if you have a double shot, you can't add the triple shot. 3 is higher than 2, so it overrides it. And while this does create balance, it doesn't create good variance. If the player knows, again, that items X, L, and M are the most powerful and game-breaking, they're going to try and get that every single time. Or if a build is so good. And again, good in this case can be a very nebulous concept. Good can mean very safe. In a game like Dead Cells, or when we play, I think it was Oblivion Override, both games limit your ability to heal as it gets harder and harder. So any skills, any items that give you passive health regen, life steal, or just more health is going to be greatly beneficial for you. And if that is always good, if an option is never bad or it's never the wrong one to take, then it becomes kind of a fixture of it. So to go back to the tagline of our video, in my Steam store page reviews, which I really need to get to, I may just have to start filming them all myself, because herding cats is very hard when it comes to getting people scheduled. One of the things that we talk about is kind of trying to placate the algorithm of Steam. You need Steam to broadcast your game. If Steam doesn't broadcast your game, people aren't going to find out about it. And one of the easiest and sometimes overlooked ways of doing this are Steam tags. Single player, RPG, multiplayer, roguelike, platformer, strategy, turn-based strategy, JRPG, you name it. There are tags for everything. And you want to include as many of them as you can on your title card, because this is how Steam will start broadcasting your game about other games. Hey, your game's a strategy game and someone's looking at their own strategy game? Well, let's put these two together. So how this relates to roguelike design is that you want your items and your abilities and your various builds to have as many different qualifiers as you can attach to them. And what I mean by that are things that can be influenced or synergized with other power skills and whatnot. So in previous examples, I always like to bring up cold because I like the cold. But we're going to mix things up this time and use heat or fire. So let's say we have a spell fireball or just fire magic. And the descriptor for it is this. Fire is an elemental type spell that will do direct damage as well as 3 seconds of damage over time when it hits an enemy. So if we were using kind of the older way of describing skills and abilities, we could say that, well, fire would be based off of fire damage, and let's say burning or DOT. And this is what a lot of ARPGs have done. Grim Dawn makes heavy use of this. So you have ice and freezing, fire and burn, I think it was, I don't know, like earth and crumbling, anything like that. And many ARPGs have used this as a way of allowing people to fine-tune their builds. But the problem is that when the number of routes you have is so limited, it makes it very railroaded. And this is an issue that I've seen with stuff like Woken and The Last Epoch. In The Last Epoch, I got a really good legendary that was, I think, the corruption, or what was it, kind of like the dark evil power of the game. That's great. But that also means that now my entire build is going to be defined by that one singular elemental type. And it's only just one thing. So what that means is 99.9% of every weapon, shield, equipment, artifact, passive, whatever I find, is worthless to me. And I really have come around to these kinds of very limited loot generation or very limited progression. Because, yes, it's really cool if you have a massive passive tree and all kinds of different active skills and ways of combining classes. But when the player decides to do X, and X just means one fixed line through everything, it's not really all that exciting. It's why the endgame of a lot of these titles just really lose me. I figured out my build 60 hours ago. Why should I keep looking for more items? I can't put any more points in. So to get back to roguelikes, with my example of fire, what we can do now is let's think of as many different tags that could go with it from my descriptor. So we could go with fire, again that's a duh, elemental, damage over time, and spell/magic. So it doesn't sound all that impressive. We went from 2 descriptors to 4. But you see, the more we have, the more we can start playing around with things that can mess or interact with these options. So here's a fun little exercise. can you come up with like passive abilities or special effects or whatever that can make use of multiple of these tags in interesting ways? So here's a few that I came up with. Let's say we have an item that converts all elemental damage to physical. Another one that says all physical damage is now multiplied by 300%. And then we have another item, all damage over time effects now take 75% of your total damage of the spell applies to it. With those three things, we just create a super devastating damage over time, far higher than you would ever be able to do. And it's this kind of spikiness, and again, in this video I'm going to be using the word variance and spikiness quite a bit in it, that leads to very interesting and very memorable runs in games. Like I said in previous videos we've done lately with Balatro. Balatro is a fantastic example of this. The jokers in the game have very far-reaching impacts on your cards, but they're very easy to understand. If you have a joker that multiplies the effects of every face card, okay, my face cards give me more chips and multi. If I have another joker that makes all cards count as face cards, well, that's really damn good as well. And again, it's about having these very memorable aspects of your game that you want the player to remember that they got the super sword that causes amazing bleed, along with the item that every time an enemy bleeds, they explode, and every time they explode, it shoots shards out, and those shards cause additional bleed, and then the bleed turns into ice, and then the ice heals you and makes you do fire damage for some inexplicable reason. And when this works, it makes your runs far more exciting, because what's the chance a player is going to get that super perfect build every single time? It's going to be very low, especially if you have hundreds and hundreds of items and artifacts and passives. But it allows a player to know that, just like as we said, good roguelike design, there's variance. That's not just about winning because of one specific build or one specific drop. There are many different ways of breaking the game, about having this spikiness. And this is what you want. Like we did with Slice and Dice as another example. That you can have something that on its own is just, it's okay, it's not going to do all that much. And that was the kind of, character does damage based on the amount of armor they have. Okay, wow, so the guy can't really put a lot of armor on him, so he does 2 points of damage at the start, big whoop. Then you combine that with characters who apply multiple armor. And let's say we get an item that gives more armor every time the character uses a specific face. Or another item that multiplies armor that's given to them. Suddenly, that skill that did maybe 1 to 3 points of damage turns into 8 to 15 points of damage. And the player remembers this. They remember that they got that amazing item or that amazing skill at the 11th hour that completely changed the run. Now, maybe it changed it too late. Maybe it wasn't enough to win on that specific run. But now they know that something like that exists in the game. And if one thing exists, then surely there must be more. Inscription is another key example of this, with the fact that you can upgrade your cards and customize them using the various kind of like stamps or markings. So that you can have a run where your squirrel can multiply, and then the squirrel does instant kills. Every time you sacrifice a squirrel, you get multiple blood back. And then you fuse the squirrel with another squirrel, so now it's a super bloody, spawning, regenerating card. And again, this is how you get people excited about your roguelike. And even if you do have fixed encounters, or fixed situations, or bosses, or elites, you want to give the player many ways of getting past them. And this was, I think, one of the issues I had with the original Slay the Spire. That the final Act 3 bosses are very much explicitly designed to be very hard counters to specific builds. Ow, my mouth just completely went off there. But you have something like the Time Eater. The Time Eater punishes playing lots and lots of cards. But if my deck or my strategy is about playing lots and lots of cards, I can't win, because that's the whole point of it. But then you have games like Balatro, where you can have a case where, okay, so all my cards are deep up unless I sell Joker. But let's say I just have super insane, like level 40, all flush 5s in my deck. Who the heck cares that you debuff my cards? I'm still going to get like a 1.5 million possibly on a perfect play. And you want to, the only way you can design your game for this to work is that you need to give the player as many different avenues for success, and again, as many different ways to make things exciting and interesting. Because again, you don't want upgrades to be small or minuscule. This ruby gives you 2% more attack. This feather gives you 0.00075% crit chance. You want something crazy like all crits now cause freeze. This shield causes you to reflect damage. These boots allow you to instantly dodge one free attack a battle or a turn. And again, even if the player doesn't get these super amazing, fantastic, game-breaking builds every single match, they know they're in there. They know they're in the pool. It's, again, that same kind of allure of a slot machine. Sometimes you pull it and you get nothing. Maybe you'll get that lucky 777 this time, or whatever they're up to with slots these days. And this is how you want to create good variance in roguelike designs, and what people are really gravitating towards, with the likes of Slice and Dice, Balatro, and a lot of the other modern ones. It's going to be very interesting. As of when I'm recording this video, it's been about a day since the III, a big indie showcase, and they announced there's going to be a Slay the Spire 2. And I am very, very, very excited to play that. I'm going to be very curious to see how and what they're changing in terms of card dynamics, builds, and just the general flow of that game for the sequel. Because again, a lot has changed since Slay the Spire, Binding of Isaac, Spelunky, and so on. People want that spikiness. They want to be able to show people, look at this. I used this card with this sword and this pair of pants, and now I play a card and I do 10 quintillion damage, and I heal 8,000% every turn. And maybe I get there on this next run. Maybe I don't. Maybe for the next one I'm stuck with sweatpants, a stick, and a rope to keep my pants up. But who knows what the next run will bring, and the next one. And this is what, again, gets these games very excitable. It's also really great to show off for your marketing and your promotions. How many streamers and YouTubers at this point have videos of them posting, I got a 50 to the power of E in Balatro? How many, what about the roulette, the roulette roguelike that's going on right now? This is how you can really show off your game, and it makes things exciting. And again, it completely removes any way of creating a harmonious balance in your game. You're not going to be able to, on one hand, say, my game is perfectly balanced, but this lets you get 10 trillion health and 8 billion DPS every second, and then in every half second, you heal an additional 10 million more percent on top of that. And there's nothing wrong with that. Again, if you want perfect balance, perfect min-maxing optimization, that's great, but it doesn't lead to variance. It leads to, again, min-maxing, to meta builds. And a lot of people just get tired of meta. When you know at the beginning that if I don't start with this specific item or get this specific build, then the entire run is over, then what's the point of playing? When, again, you can have that run where you're barely squeaking by, and then at the halfway point you get that ultra legendary that now you go from doing 2 points of damage to 80 trillion points of damage. And then after that you get the super armor that now you're immune to all damage. So to wrap things up for the video today, spikiness and variance go together like peanut butter and chocolate when it comes to roguelike design. And they're amazing ways of making your game replayable. It also, again, allows you to get away from the fact that your game is not supposed to be perfectly balanced. It is about this escalation of all the items and options and builds that gets people excited, it gets them invested in your game, and more importantly, it gets them to always click on that new game option again and again. So can you think of any other good examples of roguelikes that have escalation and spikiness to their abilities? That it's not about needing to collect one specific item or following one specific path. Let me know in the comments down below, and get back to pulling those slots and rolling those dice, or whatever you do with roulette, I guess just spinning the wheel of your roguelikes. Thanks for watching, and a special thank you to our Patreon supporters. If you enjoy the video, do the YouTubing stuff, be sure to visit our Discord and Patreon, and you're interested in more in my thoughts on design, check out my game design books.